Welcome, old viewers and new viewers, to another episode of The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn all about conflict and negotiation in the workplace, the what, the how, the when, the who. I introduce frameworks that are relevant and salient to the topic at hand. I also use original mnemonics, either of my own or other authors who can shed value at on the topic that we're discussing. I like to reserve the last Friday of each month to have a guest. Now, this guest could be a guest that is an expert in conflict resolution, or it could be any other guest that I think has something worth listening to as it pertains to conflict resolution in the workplace. So this month, the theme is interpersonal relationships. And we're using the attribution theory as the lens with which we look at interpersonal relationships. So just in a nutshell, what is the attribution theory? It's a kind of perception theory, and is popularly used in organizations to analyze and assess organization behavior. There are three parts to it. Number one, you must observe a behavior. Second, you must believe that the behavior was intentional. And third, you have to assess or judge or interpret if the behavior was internally focused, mediated, or externally. So internally means it has to do with your personality, as an example, or externally as an environmental or contextual issue impacted the behavior. So today's episode is titled Communication, the Verbals. How many of you have heard of the nursery rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me? I think quite a lot of us have heard of this nursery rhyme. So what I want to do is this. I want to share my screen with you because I was curious. I was like, okay, this is a very interesting nursery rhyme. How accurate is it? And I was also curious to want to know who was the creator of this rhyme. So I went online and researched it. And if what Dr. Google is to be trusted, I'm going to present some of the historical facts and authors who used or came up with this rhyme. So as I share my screen here, I'd like you to think about that nursery rhyme again. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. So from my research, some of the things that I found was that originally, the original record of this rhyme or saying, if you will, was actually found in the Christian Recorder in 1862. And the original was actually sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never break me. And then subsequently in 1872, another variation of this saying was sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never harm me. And then last but not least, more recently, an individual by the name of Robert Falcon. Some of you might have heard of him. So he was born in 1937, but I'm not sure exactly when he came up with his variation, but his variation goes like this: sticks and stones will break our bones, but words will break our hearts. So my original question to you was, is this saying true? Is it true that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never harm us? Well, I beg to differ. I believe that words can be very powerful. So remember, today we're talking about the verbal communication in conflict resolution. So let me stop sharing my screen and proceed with this rhyme here, if you will. So some of you might also have heard, or your mom or grandma, whoever it is, might have taught you when you were little, if you have nothing good to say, don't say anything at all, right? So yeah, so in the same token, sticks and stones may break my bones. I believe that, again, some might say it's up to is subject to interpretation. What exactly was meant by that? For example, when Robert Falcon says, "For words will break our hearts," as nice as that sounds, actually, I would beg to differ in the sense and say words may break our hearts. They don't always break our hearts. So an interesting thing too was this. The whole premise of this nursery rhyme, my understanding from my research, was to help children build resilience to workplace bullying, to bullying in general. And guess what? While I was researching the origin of this nursery rhyme, I happened upon a YouTube clip. It's actually titled "Sticks and Stones." And from what I can see, it was dated 2019, but besides the sticks and stones, it has workplace bullying. So why am I bringing this up? I bring it up because I'm preparing you in advance that next week we are gonna be dissecting and analyzing this movie. So yes, next week is gonna be story time, movie time, if you will, okay? So invite your friends to come back. But one thing I should mention, that movie, or it's actually called a drama, my apologies. It was written as Sticks and Stones Workplace Bullying Drama. There are 3 episodes, so please be careful which one you choose. And again, depending on where you are watching this, I don't know what access of platforms you have, but I also noticed that it's also available. The person who uploaded onto YouTube said movie Are Us. And then I also noticed ITV and BritBox, so it is British. Nevertheless, a word of caution before you watch this movie. I am cognizant of the fact that there are some people who have experienced workplace bullying, and depending on where you are in that healing trajectory, it can be very poignant. So this drama would definitely elicit some painful memories, but I encourage you to watch it till the end. The end will be very, very interesting and will put a big smile on your face. So your call to action is get your friends, family members, colleagues, watch the movie, the drama before next week, and then come join me next week as we dissect and analyze this movie, okay? So moving on. So some of you who've watched me before and joined us before know that I like to use different workplace scenarios to illustrate the topic at hand. So today I want to invite you to use your imagination and transport yourself to a meeting that's been held between unions and management. So a negotiation process is going to be happening here, okay? So some of you might be like, "Oh, I can't envision that. I've never been a part of such meetings." But just imagine you're a fly on the wall, perhaps, and there the 2 parties are the union and management. And let's just say they're negotiating maybe contracts for wages, as an example, okay? So one of the things that has been noted when it comes to negotiations is that there are 3 problems. And I want to give credit to the authors of one of my very favorite books on negotiation, Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, okay? So one of my favorite authors, so it is by Fisher, Ury, and Bruce Patton, okay? So why do I share this with you? Because I am going to read an excerpt shortly, but to give credit where credit is due, they did mention 3 problems that you find in communication. Number 1, negotiators may not be talking to each other. What does that mean? Even though there are parties at the table representing union and management, these parties at the table may not be the ones who are ultimately the decision makers. They may just be collecting information, gathering, walk away from the table, report back to whoever is in authority to make the final decision. That's one scenario. Another aspect could be that the parties may not be physically at a physical table. They might be corresponding virtually, via telephone, you name it. So can you imagine how that can be a recipe for disaster, where communication can be misconstrued when the parties who need to be at the table are not at the table, either physically or metaphorically, where decisions are left in somebody else's hand? Yes, you will want to make sure that there is trust. and you trust the ability of the individuals gathering the information, and you trust their integrity as well. The second problem in communication is lack of metaphorical hearing. I use the word metaphorical hearing. Why? Hearing is one of our senses. When I talk about metaphorical hearing, you and I, as an example, can be having a conversation. Your words are being transmitted into my ears. I have no problem with my eardrums or any of the small bones like my anvil, hammer, stirrup bones. They work perfectly fine. My eardrums working perfectly fine. However, what you're saying to me, I may not be registering it, I may not be interpreting it, or vice versa. So in the same token, when negotiations are happening, the same parties are speaking the same language, speaking the same jargon, but for some reason, sometimes, not always, sometimes, it's as if words are falling on deaf ears, so to speak. A third common problem that might happen in negotiations is misunderstanding. So what do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, you have parties that are from, let's say, well, I'm Canadian, I speak English. English and French are our official languages. But nevertheless, let's say you bring 3 parties who are from England, Australia, and Canada, speaking English. Now, some of you might know there are different nuances and different choice of words people might use. In that particular country, it means something totally different, even though they're all speaking English. So it's very important that people understand the different nuances of the parties you're negotiating with, even though you're speaking the same language, so to speak, make sure no jargons are used and people understand what each word or expression means. That brings me to an excerpt in my favorite book on negotiation that I want to share with you. It's an example of how misunderstandings can happen. Okay, especially when you're dealing internationally and where there are cultural differences and different linguistic and language barriers or intonations and meanings, okay? So I read, where the parties speak different languages, the chance for misinterpretation is compounded. For example, in Persian, the word compromise apparently lacks the positive meaning it has in English. The positive meaning it has in English of a midway solution both sides can live with, but has only a negative meaning as in our integrity was compromised. Similarly, the word mediator in Persian suggests meddler, someone who is barging in uninvited. In early 1980, the UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim flew to Iran to seek the release of American diplomats being held hostage by Iranian students. Soon after the Islamic Revolution, his efforts were seriously set back when Iranian national radio and television broadcast in Persian a remark he reportedly made on his arrival in Tehran. I have come as a mediator to work out a compromise. Within an hour of the broadcast, his car was being stoned by angry Iranians. Okay, let's break that down. He said, I have come as a mediator to work out a compromise. To you and I, Canadians, English, Australians, that sounds very good. But for the Iranians, it was not translated or it didn't mean the same thing that you and I would take for the word mediator and compromise. So just in case you didn't quite catch that, compromise to them means someone's integrity has been compromised. And a mediator means someone who meddles, barges in uninvited. So such a statement was not well received by them, even though he meant well. So that highlights the importance, like I said earlier, make sure that your choice of words, and now I'll even add your nonverbals, are congruent to the audience you have at hand, okay? So moving on, one might say, okay, that's good to know. So when I'm at this table or when I'm negotiating or when I'm in a conflict in general, what are the ways I should verbalize that are positive? Excellent question. For example, I'm going to start by talking about idioms. So what are idioms? Again, depending on where you are, what country you are, use idioms selectively. I personally like idioms. Why? Because they're short, succinct, and they say a million words in one sentence or two. For example, how many of you have heard the saying or the idiom, a stitch in time saves nine? A stitch in time saves nine. Some of you might be like, what does that mean? Some of you, if English is your first language and you grew up around grandparents or parents who spoke maybe the Queen's English, like I did, I grew up speaking the Queen's English and learning the Queen's English, you may understand right away what that means. Or some of you who did not, you can quickly understand what that means by breaking down the words. But for just in case someone doesn't understand it, a stitch in time saves nine. A stitch is basically, think of when you have a clothing that's been rendered. And what I mean by rendered is either torn, as an example, right? So the sooner you sew it up, the less chances of it rending any, tearing any further. So you've also heard of the saying or the idiom or the proverb, prevention is better than cure. So in the same token, a stitch in time saves nine. So why do I say that? Sometimes in negotiations, less words are best. People don't need a whole thesis or a dissertation, just give them what they need to know succinctly and concisely. That sometimes speaks volumes, okay? Again, be mindful of your audience. Second, we've heard about the whole active listening. Yes, you need to be self-aware. You need to make sure as you're listening to the other party, you're not formulating your answer while they're talking. Some people who have the habit of interrupting, that can be really hard. So some suggestions could be, as part of listening actively, you can be jotting down points you want to refer to back later so you don't forget. I've also heard of an individual, I can't remember where I heard this or read this, but the individual that had a habit of interrupting decided to initiate a strategy. They will put their physical hands underneath their thighs while they're seated. Why? That's a physical cue for them not to interrupt the person speaking. Another strategy I've seen as well is, you've heard, when I say I've seen, I retract that. I haven't seen it, but I have used the metaphorical talking stick. And the talking stick roots is from the indigenous culture. So basically, it's a sign of respect that when you're in a meeting or a gathering, the individual that has the stick in hand is the only one that speaks. Everyone else gives them their undivided attention. So how have I used a metaphorical talking stick? I've been in meetings, not negotiations, but in meetings whereby conflict, well, it was heated. Let's say it was heated. And people wanted to talk, share their opinions. There was a lack of patience. And what I said, okay, whoever has the pen in their hand is the one who gets to speak. Guess what? It actually worked. And in a subsequent meeting, they will look at me as to see if I'm going to pass out a pen as a microphone, aka talking stick. So there are different strategies one can use in terms of verbal communication in conjunction with nonverbals to aid in one's communication in a high heated conflict situation. And then we talk about the I statements. That's a popularly known strategy. Most people know, if you've taken a communication class, you've heard of the I statements. And what is the premise of the I statement? Is basically when you're in a conflict with someone or in a difficult conversation with someone, you don't start by telling the person what they did using you statements. So for example, I could say, I felt very belittled when you mocked me, or when I was mocked rather, in the meeting. I felt very belittled when you hung up the phone on me. As opposed to, you hung up the phone on me, and do you know how that made me feel? So again, reversing and choosing the I statements, how you felt as a result of someone's actions or behavior. Now, be careful with your audience. Why do I say that when you use the I statements? I'll give you a personal example. There was an individual I was in conversation with. There was a difference of opinion, and I kept using the I statements. All of a sudden, the person was like, why is it all about you? All I hear is I. I. So obviously this person didn't understand the technique and strategy of using the I statement. So why do I share that? I share that to say, number one, as much as you're well-intentioned in using I statements, your recipient may not know the strategy you're using. So that's why it's good to educate people for them to know about it. So I'm not saying the I statement works 100% to alleviate or diffuse conflict. No, but it is helpful. It's one of those many strategies one can use. And then the other thing I want to talk about is your tone. Have you heard the statement, you're not very, or something to that effect, you're not very convincing when you're abrasive? So the key is you should be assertive, absolutely. So on a previous episode of A is to Assert, I talked about the do's and don'ts while you're certain. So feel free to go back to that episode and watch it if you haven't. But basically the key and premise is this: absolutely, your tone should be assertive and firm. Have you been in situations where the conversation is really heated and people's voices start elevating? Sometimes I'm like thinking to myself, the other party is not deaf. They can hear you. There's nothing wrong with their physical senses. So why are you elevating your voice? If anything, it makes you feel bad when you elevate your voice. Some people think, oh, maybe if I speak louder, they'll see how serious I am. Or it will get through their head if you're not getting it. Well, no, it makes you look very bad. It paints you in a very bad light. So yeah, your tone is important. Be firm, be assertive, be kind. Again, ask yourself, if I were in the other party's shoes, how would I like to be spoken to? Now, we're human. We don't always get it 100%. There's room for grace, but if you remember the strategies, some say take a deep breath before you respond. There's the HALT strategy, which is basically if you're hungry or angry or lonely or tired, address those first before you engage yourself in a conflict situation or conflict. When I say conflict situation, conflict or a conversation that has a potential to be heated, if you will, okay? So now, what are the don'ts? What do you not want to do in a conflict situation? Well, there's anger. Anger in itself is not necessarily bad. It all depends on how it is being portrayed. Anger can manifest with verbal insults, elevated tones, as example, in keeping with the verbal aspect of communication. Anger, on the other hand, with the nonverbals could be silence. You could see a frown on someone's face. It could be avoidance. But did you know that anger is a secondary emotion? What do I mean by it's a secondary emotion? By that I mean, anger is not the true emotion. It's a mask for the true emotion the individual is feeling. So if someone is angry, it could be that you're feeling fearful or disrespected, and other possible answers can be provided as to why they're feeling anger. So when someone is expressing in an anger tone, you should not become angry yourself. If anything, keep a steady voice and calm as much as possible. One of the strategies I've used in the past that was helpful was we were having a conversation, it was late in the evening, this individual's voice was elevated. I think they were tired, honestly, I think that's what it is, maybe. And the person's voice had elevated, going higher and higher. And I said, I just maintained my tone. I didn't elevate my voice and said, I don't know if you know, but your voice just went, you just raised your voice. They're like, I did? I'm like, yeah, you actually did. And then the person toned down. Now, that doesn't always work for everybody, but in this case, it did. So that tells me that, again, depending on individuals, how humble they are, their ego levels, how interested they are in resolving a conflict. If they want to, they might recognize how they're being perceived, even if they weren't aware of it. Now, psychological warfare has to do with threats and gaslighting as examples. There are many aspects of psychological warfare, but for today, I just want to address threats and gaslighting. These are the don'ts in verbal communication as it pertains to conflict resolution. So what exactly is the difference between a threat and a warning? So all the definitions I'm going to give you, I found on the Oxford Dictionary online, okay? So a warning is a statement, an event, etc., telling somebody that something bad or unpleasant may happen in the future so that they can try to avoid it. So as an example, going back to the negotiating table of unions and management. So a warning could be the union representative mentioning to the management, you know what, staff are overworked. They've been working overtime, they're tired, they're concerned about safety issues, which are actually happening. They may go on strike, okay? So that's a warning, it's not a threat, okay? They're legitimate, okay? However, a threat is defined as a statement in which you tell somebody that you will punish or harm them, especially if they do not do what you want. So a threat could be, again, you see the difference? You tell someone that you will punish or harm them, especially if they do not do what you want. So a threat has a negative and malicious undertone to it based on this definition. I mean, you think about it. When has someone given you a warning versus a threat? Reflect on that, okay? And then last but not least, I mentioned I'm going to talk about gaslighting here. So gaslighting, excuse me, I'll get a sip here. Excuse me. Gaslighting, the process of making somebody believe untrue things in order to control them, especially that they have imagined or been wrong about what has really happened. I repeat, gaslighting is the process of making somebody believe untrue things in order to control them, especially that they have imagined or been wrong about what has really happened. Whew, that's deep. That's painful if you've been a recipient of gaslighting. Notice my words, recipient. I didn't say victim. Some might use the word victim, but why I choose not to use that word victim is because I don't want you to have the mindset I'm a victim, woe is me. If you've been a recipient of gaslighting. Is it real? Yes. Does it happen in the workplace? Absolutely. I personally, to be honest with you, never even knew what gaslighting was. I only heard about that term about maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I was having a conversation with somebody and the person was like, that sounds like gaslighting. And it was almost like an epiphany. And I want to say research on what is gaslighting. So why is this relevant? This is the don'ts of how you communicate during a conflict situation or negotiation. Don't gaslight people. Now, you'll be like, okay, I have to think about that one. But guess what? Your call to action was to watch the movie, I should say drama, Sticks and Stones, the 219 version on YouTube. It's a Sticks and Stones 2019 workplace bullying, okay? When you watch 3 episodes of that, you're going to understand, if you don't fully understand what gaslighting is, along with other aspects of workplace bullying, okay? So my caution was, please, if you're not emotionally or mentally ready to watch such a thing, if you've been a recipient of workplace bullying, please stay away. Or it might help in your healing trajectory to let you know you're not alone and give you some strategies as to how to deal with it, okay? So the last thing I want to leave with you is, in a conflict situation, you've heard me talk a little bit about the right way to communicate, the wrong way to communicate. Ask yourself the question, in this conflict I find myself, I extend my metaphorical hand. It's up to you to accept my handshake or not to accept my hand for a handshake. Do you want this conflict to err on the side of constructive or destructive? Should it build us up, build up the organization, or should it tear the individual down or tear down the organization? I hope you would choose the constructive aspect for an outcome in a conflict situation. So we're almost out of time. I always like to leave you with this insightful thought. Remember that you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. Have a splendid day. See you next time. Same place next time. Bye-bye.